Hey guys, what's happening? So now jumping back into X-Men, and at this point really just briefly talking about issue 10, where in this case Hickman does give us a bit more information about the Vulcan situation and what that may have opened up in relation to Empyre and Ten of Swords. So let's get into it, but first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping right back in, we go back to that reoccurring dream, which we've been seeing Vulcan have where he's floating in the vault. But in this case, when we visit his dream, we get a bit more information. Because at this point, though we do know Vulcan survived the Terrigen bomb and the creation of the vault, but even with that, there were still many lingering questions of how he just showed up back, with a personality very different from where we had seen him last. But where we pick up from his dream and we get a bit more information, it's here where we see him carefully abducted by a creature that looks a lot like the Supreme Intelligence. But as it turns out, is these three creatures who very much feel like a deeper tease into the original creation of the whole Celestial Messiah, especially with us knowing that the vault, which Vulcan was floating around in, it had created a doorway between space and time. And it's here where these creatures abduct Vulcan, they express almost like this is their second chance to use the celestial avatar, because prior to this point they had already lost the first one. But in the case of Vulcan, for this very cryptic recollection of this dream, we're shown that these creatures had made their way into the vault, and when they did, they found Vulcan, who they had seen as broken and twisted, and these were attributes which they had seen beneficial to their cause, which specifically were not given just yet. But it's that portion of Vulcan that they describe as a cancer, of which they find valuable, and they lock away within him, and separating from the more calm Vulcan which we know recently, which was likely more of his personality prior to Deadly Genesis. But it's after this dream where he wakes up in the Summers home, to where here also with him there's Petra and Sway. And as soon as he gets up, they're talking about having drinks again. And though it sounds tempting on the surface, it kind of leads you to think, like in the case of Petra and Sway, like how much do they remember about their previous lives in that history? Because prior to this point, we'd seen a lot of memory manipulation going on in Krakoa. And in the case of Vulcan, a couple times now we've had it confirmed that one, he never died, but then two, now we see there's other characters in the play as far as the manipulation of his mind and so forth. But in the case of Sway and Petra, they were brought back through the resurrection program, and with us knowing that, it's very much likely that also in their case, much like Shinobi Shaw, some of their memories have been taken out or augmented in order to keep them in line, so to speak, because prior to this point they were a part of that original X-Men team who were sent to Krakoa by Charles Xavier and killed as a result, which could also be the reason why they're staying in the summer house and not physically on Krakoa. But if this truly is the case with Petra and Sway, and it's true that they've had their memories manipulated like Shinobi Shaw or even Domino, then this would very much explain their similarities in their connection with Vulcan, to where it's like on the surface they seem okay, but it's like you can tell that they're not, because they're continually drinking, passing out, mainly because there's something deeper under the surface that's just not okay. But it's here where we see Vulcan initially indulge in these spirits with these two ladies, but when he's offered another he politely declines and he decides to go for a walk. And really it's here where before I kind of joked about the idea when we were talking about Empyre, because with what we had seen with the Kotati in the blue area of the moon, like at the time I couldn't help but think like the Summers house is right around the corner. And it's here where we see Vulcan go for this walk that we find out that it's literally like a mile away, which is one of the things that I'm glad that Hickman brought us to, because it would have felt weird having this dramatic change happen right next to the summer home and nobody noticed. But that's not the case here, and I appreciate it. But when he arrives here, he discovers the Kotati, who have been making their preparations in order to attack Earth, and when Vulcan sees them, he's like, hey, okay, I get it, humans are bad, you guys have been through it, and you guys are on that FOE right now, ferns over everything. But he also lets them know, like, if they go through with this, and take this path of killing all life that's not plants, that all this will accomplish is just making them just as bad as the ones who had did them their hurt, of whom we know in their case is the Kree. But so now the view of Vulcan taking this walk, like in the perspective of Sway and Petra, like for them, they just see him walk off into the Earth set and then boom. And when they see this, Sway is like, yo, you think we should go check on him? And Petra's like, nah, we're gonna sit here and finish these drinks. To where in this case, I don't blame them, because this is Emperor Vulcan. And clearly, if he survived the fault, like how is this little bitty explosion the size of a city block gonna take him out? Like how, Sway? How? But what's crazy, when we flip back to Vulcan and we see at this point that he's allowed them to subdue him because he's truly trying to talk sense into these guys. And it's interesting, like when he communicates with them, like one, it's because the Krakoan dialect, which was previously created by Krakoa and Cypher, or at least the written translation of it, but as it turns out, this language is very native to Kotati. So in that case, anyone who speaks Krakoan or passes through a gate, they can also communicate with Kotati language. But it's here where the Kotati try to force him in interrogation seed to pull information out of Vulcan. It's here where he has a flashback to those creatures who abducted him from the vault, to where with doing so, they separated the Emperor Vulcan, who was the villain we had come to know at the end of War of Kings, and they had trapped him down inside of Vulcan's subconscious using a similar method. And as it turns out, when Vulcan had seen this is what triggered that flashback and his moderate reaction. Because we know, like, if Vulcan really wanted to, he could have turned the moon into cookie crumbs. And this really is one of the things that makes me want to get into a bit of a rehash of how powerful Vulcan is. And really not even so much a rehash of how powerful he is, but the reason why he's so powerful. And I believe that is very important, especially now, that we keep in mind and look back to Uncanny X-Men issue 477, and we remember that when Scarlet Witch had wiped out a majority of the mutant population, that it was at that time when Vulcan, he had encountered a massive amount of mutant energy, which back then awakened him from what seemed to be his death at the time and made him an Omega level mutant, which he's very much been from that moment forward. But what I want to point out here is not just the fact that he's crazy powerful, but also through the course of Empyre, with Scarlet Witch trying to fix what she had did with decimation, but failing to find that answer, that it's very possible that that answer may lie within Vulcan. And with keeping this in mind, like, he's likely the reason why, when we talked about Scarlet Witch going to Doctor Strange, and her recently trying to find a way throughout Empyre to undo what she did with decimation, that she cannot find an answer because she's unaware of Vulcan's history. And with these new characters that have come into play, who have literally searched Vulcan inside and out, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if they knew more than just War of Kings and that evil Emperor in reference to the fire and the power, or as what they would call a cancer, residing inside of Vulcan. And the crazy thing is, like, with seeing this, it's like we know so much, but at the same time, like, we don't know anything. And with getting this huge answers and adding that to what we know from Vulcan's history, it then presents the bigger questions, which I'm very excited to see Hickman answer at some point in the future. But at this point with Vulcan incinerating this group of Kotati, who he tried to talk out of attacking Earth, or at the least leaving Krakoa out of it, to where Sway and Petra come to check on him, and once again not like to see if he's okay, but just to be more like, well, are you done? Because in the case of Vulcan, like, as far as damage, I don't think people really worry about this guy. But at this point, where the two of them more or less come to take him back to the Summers home, it's here we get a bit of a tease that Vulcan is still corrupt, but it really makes us wonder, like, how much is he in control, and beyond that, like, what part will he play moving forward? Because when he goes back with Sway and Petra, he's back to the nice Vulcan that we know. But even still with seeing this, we know that everything's not okay, and that's the part that kind of brings me back to Ten of Swords. Because on the Ten of Swords playlist, we've come to the point where we know a betrayal is around the corner. And at this point in time, the mutants have a number of suspects lingering around. And with the more that we discover, it's like the more you can make a viable case for any given person. And just to be clear, as far as that betrayal, I still think Beast is in the lead. Like, he still has the most reasons to want to intentionally die. But on top of that, it's like now, like, if Beast knew everything that we know now as the reader, like in the full scope, like if he follows through with that desire to take Cerebro from Charles, like it would be insane to see what he could possibly do with that information. But once again, that's not a guaranteed thing to happen, just sharing some of my thoughts. And it's kind of hard not to, because with little stories like this, when Hickman gives us little bits and pieces and stretches things out for what could possibly be something that's years in the making, like it's kind of hard not to think of a dozen different things that could possibly happen. But it's also after this where they head back to the Summers house when we find out that Scott had left a note for Gabriel, letting him know that he should reconsider the whole idea about him not getting out as much. Because at this time we see that Scott has went on that trip that we'd seen him talking to Logan about, and he wanted Vulcan to come, but he didn't want to wake him. And with this note, he more or less lets Vulcan know that he should definitely come out with them the next time as they make their way to Shi'ar space. Which is one of those things that kind of got me like, I don't know, Scott, I don't know if that's a good idea. But it's not long after this that we then find out that a Kotati survivor from Vulcan's explosion, he had then made his way back to the Kotati before succumbing to his injuries. And with doing so, the word from that one survivor before he had died, it had made it back to one of their generals, and that last word that he uttered had been Krakoa. And so now before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so we can head to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And I gotta let you guys know, like, I could be way off with saying this, but I just kind of got this feeling that down the road, somebody's gonna take Vulcan's power, man, like all of it. It could be Charles, it could be Beast, it could be the Celestial Avatar. But I kind of just got this feeling that things just aren't gonna go well for Vulcan at some point in the near future. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.